Were medieval queens just pawns in a grim Game of Thrones? Did royal vows ever lead to anything but misery for some unfortunate souls? Step back into the Middle Ages, where love was often a luxury, and marriage a strategic battlefield. Number 10. Henry IV, Holy Roman Emperor, and Bertha of Savoy. The year is 1066. While across the English Channel, William the Conqueror was changing the course of English history. Deep in the Holy Roman Empire, a young emperor, Henry IV, was battling a different kind of challenge: his marriage. He had been betrothed to Bertha of Savoy since childhood, a common practice in the courts of Europe designed to solidify alliances and secure borders. Bertha was the daughter of Otto, Count of Savoy, and Adelaide of Susa, powerful figures in the Alpine regions. The union was intended to bring the House of Savoy into the imperial fold, strengthening Henry's position against rebellious dukes and ambitious princes. The marriage took place in Tribur, a gathering of nobles and clergy that marked the formal union of two significant European dynasties. Bertha brought with her not just her lineage, but also a substantial dowry, a promise of financial and military support from her powerful family. Yet, from the very beginning, something was deeply amiss. Chroniclers of the period, like Lambert of Hersfeld, recorded that Henry felt a profound aversion to his new wife. He openly despised her, making no secret of his desire to be rid of her. This was not merely a private matter. The emperor's disdain for his empress was a public spectacle, undermining the very dignity of the imperial court. Bertha, for her part, was described as a quiet and devout woman, bearing her husband's contempt with a stoic patience that perhaps only intensified his irritation. She was loyal, committed to her duties as empress, and diligently pursued the imperial interest even as her personal life was steeped in neglect and public humiliation. Henry's attempts to divorce Bertha became a major point of contention within the empire and with the papacy. In 1069, only 3 years after their wedding, Henry announced his intention to repudiate Bertha. His stated reason was that their marriage had not been consummated, a claim that was widely doubted and seen as a flimsy pretext. He even went so far as to offer the bishopric of Mainz, a powerful ecclesiastical office, to Siegfried I, the Archbishop of Mainz, if he would declare the marriage invalid. This audacious move revealed the lengths to which Henry was willing to go to escape his marital bonds, highlighting his political ruthlessness and his personal unhappiness. However, the divorce was not a simple matter for an emperor. The Church, under Pope Alexander II, viewed the sanctity of marriage as paramount. A synod was convened in Mainz in 1069 to address Henry's demand. Cardinal Peter Damian, a respected papal legate, was sent to represent the Pope's firm opposition to the divorce. Damian delivered a powerful address, reminding Henry of the moral implications of his actions and the potential for a papal interdict on the empire if he proceeded with the divorce. He warned that such a move would not only tarnish Henry's reputation but also alienate the powerful House of Savoy, whose alliance was crucial for imperial stability. Faced with the unwavering opposition of the Church and the political ramifications of offending Bertha's formidable family, Henry was forced to back down. The divorce was denied. Bertha remained empress, but her status did little to improve her personal situation. The imperial court remained a place of estrangement for her, and Henry continued to treat her with cold indifference. Despite this profound marital discord, Bertha continued to perform her imperial duties. She traveled with Henry, attended state functions, and even bore him several children. Their first child, Conrad, was born in 1074, followed by Agnes in 1077, and Henry V in 1086. These children, future heirs and dynastic connections, were born into a household torn by the emperor's open rejection of their mother. The ongoing marital strife was not merely a personal tragedy, it deeply intertwined with the monumental political and religious conflicts of Henry's reign, particularly the investiture controversy. Henry's repeated attempts to assert his authority over the Church, culminating in his infamous clash with Pope Gregory VII, were perhaps exacerbated by his own perceived inability to control even his domestic life. Pope's stance against his divorce likely fueled Henry's resentment towards papal authority, contributing to the escalation of tensions between the secular and spiritual powers. When Henry was excommunicated by Gregory VII in 1076, a move that severely weakened his position among his German princes, Bertha stood by her husband. She even accompanied him on his arduous journey to Canossa in 1077, where Henry famously humbled himself before the Pope, standing barefoot in the snow for 3 days to seek absolution. Her presence at this moment of extreme imperial humiliation underscored her loyalty, yet it did not soften Henry's heart towards her. Bertha's life was marked by her husband's constant rejection and the broader turmoil of the empire. She passed away in 1087 at the age of 39, leaving behind an emperor who had never truly accepted her as his wife. Her death freed Henry to pursue other marital options, but it did not resolve the deep-seated political and religious conflicts that defined his reign. The marriage, intended to secure alliances, instead highlighted the profound personal miseries that could plague a royal union, even as it became a pawn in the larger game of medieval power politics. The legacy of Henry and Bertha was one of forced cohabitation, public humiliation, and the enduring strain of a relationship where political necessity vastly outweighed personal affection, creating a constant undercurrent of instability in the emperor's personal and public life. Number 9. Frederick I, Holy Roman Emperor, and Adela of Vohburg. In the mid-12th century, the Holy Roman Empire sought stability after a period of intense internal strife, and a rising star on the political horizon was Frederick, Duke of Swabia. He was a man of ambition, charisma, and a keen strategic mind. His first marriage, arranged in 1147, was to Adela of Vohburg, a noblewoman from Bavaria. Adela was the daughter of Diephold III, Margrave of Vohburg, and her lineage, though not of the highest imperial rank, provided a useful connection to the regional nobility of Bavaria. The union was intended to solidify Frederick's position within the German lands, gaining him support and influence as he navigated the complex political landscape. The marriage itself was a solemn affair, marked by the usual ceremonies and festivities of the time, designed to cement the alliance between the rising Hohenstaufen family and the Vohburg sham dynasty. However, the ink on the marriage contract was barely dry when Frederick's ambitions began to soar far beyond what this initial union could truly serve. In 1152, Frederick was elected King of the Romans, destined to become the Holy Roman Emperor. This elevation meant that his marital needs suddenly changed dramatically. His new imperial status required a consort who could bring not just regional connections, but international prestige, wealth, and powerful territorial claims that would enhance the imperial domain. Adela, while a respectable noblewoman, did not possess the kind of dynastic weight now required for an emperor-in-waiting. She had also, at this point, borne Frederick no children, a significant concern in an age where male heirs were paramount to the stability of a ruling dynasty. Frederick, a man known for his decisive and often ruthless pragmatism, wasted no time in addressing this perceived deficiency. By 1153, less than 6 years after their wedding, he began the process of having his marriage to Adela annulled. The official grounds for annulment were often legalistic and technical, allowing powerful rulers to discard inconvenient spouses. In Frederick's case, the chosen justification was consanguinity, that he and Adela were too closely related by blood for the marriage to be valid in the eyes of the Church. While some degree of familial relationship was common among noble families of the era, The exact degree required for an annulment could be debated and manipulated, especially when royal power was involved. The Bishop of Constance Hermann was charged with overseeing the process. The annulment was formally declared in 1153 at a diet in Constance. This public declaration effectively cast Adela aside, removing her from her position as queen-elect and future empress. The move was a clear demonstration of Frederick's willingness to prioritize political expediency over marital vows and personal attachment for Adela. It was a profound personal and social disaster. She had been married to a rising duke, then saw him elevated to the most powerful position in Europe, only to be publicly discarded before she could fully assume her rightful place beside him. Her status was irrevocably altered, her future uncertain, and her reputation likely tarnished by the official reasons for the annulment, whether true or not. Frederick, now free, wasted no time in securing a new, more advantageous match. In 1156, he married Beatrice I, Countess of Burgundy. This marriage was a masterstroke of political strategy. Beatrice was a wealthy heiress, bringing with her the vast and strategically important county of Burgundy, which spanned modern-day eastern France and western Switzerland. This acquisition significantly expanded the Holy Roman Empire's territorial reach and resources, strengthening Frederick's hand in his numerous campaigns in Italy and against his German rivals. The union with Beatrice also proved fruitful in terms of heirs, as she bore him several sons, securing the Hohenstaufen succession. While Frederick went on to become one of the most famous and powerful emperors of the Middle Ages, known as Barbarossa, Adela of Vohburg faded into historical obscurity. Her life after the annulment is poorly documented, a testament to her diminished status. Some accounts suggest she may have retired to a convent, a common path for discarded noble women, or perhaps she remarried a lesser noble. Her story became a stark illustration of the brutal realities of dynastic marriage, where individuals, particularly women, could be summarily dismissed when they no longer served the shifting political and dynastic interests of their powerful husbands. The marriage, intended to forge alliances and secure a ruler's position, became a temporary convenience, dissolved the moment a more advantageous opportunity arose, leaving the discarded spouse to bear the quiet consequences. The cold calculation of the annulment was a chilling testament to the impersonal nature of power in medieval courts, where human connections were secondary to the strategic demands of the throne. Number 8. Philip II of France and Ingeborg of Denmark. In the late 12th century, Philip II of France, known as Philip Augustus, was one of the most formidable kings in Europe. A strategic and ambitious ruler, he aimed to expand his royal domain and assert French dominance over the continent. After the death of his first wife, Adela of Hainaut, Philip sought a new queen who could bring him not only an heir but also crucial political alliances. His eyes turned to Denmark, a rising naval power in the Baltic Sea, whose support could be valuable in Philip's ongoing conflicts, particularly with England. In 1193, a marriage was arranged between Philip and Ingeborg, the sister of King Canute VI of Denmark. The union was intended to cement a Franco-Danish alliance, potentially even leading to Danish naval support for an invasion of England, a long-held ambition of the French king. Ingeborg arrived in France with a substantial dowry and an entourage of Danish nobles. The marriage ceremony took place on 14 August 1193 in Amiens. However, what followed was an event that baffled and shocked all of Europe. On the very day of the coronation, or perhaps the day after, Philip Augustus exhibited an inexplicable and profound aversion to his new wife. Chroniclers describe him recoiling from her, declaring her ugly or possessing a bad breath, though these reasons were likely pretexts. He immediately refused to consummate the marriage, and within a few weeks made it clear he intended to repudiate Ingeborg. This sudden and public rejection of a newly wedded queen was unprecedented and deeply insulting to both Ingeborg and her powerful Danish family. Philip's actions escalated rapidly. In October 1193, a council of French bishops and nobles, heavily pressured by the king, annulled the marriage on the flimsy grounds of consanguinity, a relationship that had been conveniently overlooked during the marriage negotiation. Ingeborg, a stranger in a foreign land, was left bewildered and isolated. She had learned enough French to protest this injustice, appealing directly to the Pope and steadfastly refusing to accept the annulment. She continued to call herself Queen of France, a title Philip denied her. Despite her pleas, Philip took swift action, sending her away to a convent, then to a series of remote castles, keeping her in virtual imprisonment. Philip, determined to have a new wife, quickly sought a third marriage. In 1196, he married Agnes of Merania, daughter of Berthold, Duke of Merania. This union, undertaken while Ingeborg was still alive and her marriage to Philip unrecognized as annulled by the highest ecclesiastical authority, immediately plunged Philip into a direct and bitter conflict with the papacy. Pope Celestine III initially condemned Philip's actions, but it was his successor, the formidable Pope Innocent III, who took a much harder line. Innocent, a powerful and unwavering pontiff, viewed Philip's treatment of Ingeborg as a grave affront to the sanctity of marriage and papal authority. Pope Innocent III demanded that Philip take Ingeborg back as his rightful queen. When Philip refused, Innocent imposed an interdict on France in 1200. An interdict was a devastating blow for a medieval kingdom. All public religious services ceased, including mass, baptisms, marriages, and burials. Churches were closed, bells silenced, and the dead went unburied in consecrated ground. This state of spiritual deprivation caused immense distress among the French populace, who believed their souls were now in peril. Pressure on Philip mounted from his own people, his nobles, and his clergy, who felt the full weight of the papal curse. For a time, Philip tried to defy the Pope, but the spiritual and political consequences of the interdict were too severe. Agnes of Merania, though having borne Philip 2 children, a son and a daughter, was technically living in sin in the eyes of the Church. She died in 1201, reportedly from distress, though some speculate a darker end. Her children were initially deemed illegitimate. A significant dynastic concern for Philip. Agnes's death did not resolve the issue of Ingeborg. Pope still insisted that Philip return to his first wife. Philip was eventually forced to yield, at least outwardly. In 1201, he publicly took Ingeborg back, recognizing her as his queen. However, this was largely a charade. He continued to keep her confined, often in isolated locations, and largely ignored her. Despite her restoration to the title, her life remained one of solitude and quiet suffering within the gilded cage of her royal status. She repeatedly appealed to the Pope, seeking a true restitution of her marital rights and a genuine place at court. Philip, for his part, tried various strategies to get rid of her again, including accusing her of witchcraft, but none succeeded. Ingeborg outlived Philip II, finally gaining true freedom and a measure of respect after his death in 1223. She was a witness to her stepson, Louis VIII, becoming king, and then his son, Louis IX. She passed away in 1236, having spent over 4 decades as the legally recognized but personally rejected Queen of France. Her marriage, intended to secure a crucial alliance, instead resulted in a protracted and humiliating conflict between the French monarchy and the papacy, a national interdict, and a queen who endured decades of royal rejection and immense suffering it could inflict on individuals caught in its intricate web. Number 7. King John of England and Isabella of Angoulême. The year 1200 was a pivotal moment for King John of England. His first marriage to Isabella of Gloucester had been childless and uninspiring, and he was eager to secure a new union that would provide him with heirs and solidify his position, particularly in his volatile French territories. His eyes fell upon Isabella of Angoulême, a young woman of breathtaking beauty, described by chroniclers as one of the most beautiful women in Europe. Isabella was the daughter of Aymer Taillefer, Count of Angoulême, a powerful lord whose lands were strategically located in the Aquitaine region, a contested territory between the English and French crowns. The arrangement for Isabella's marriage, however, was already in place. She was betrothed to Hugh X of Lusignan, a powerful and ambitious Poitevin noble, a sworn rival of John Poitevin. Despite this existing betrothal, King John, driven by a combination of desire and political calculation, decided to act boldly. In the summer of 1200, he journeyed to Angoulême, effectively abducting Isabella from her betrothed and marrying her himself on 24 August 1200. This act was a grave insult to Hugh X of Lusignan, violating feudal customs and personal honor. John's actions demonstrated a callous disregard for the established order and for the powerful Lusignan family, whom he desperately needed as allies against the encroaching power of Philip II of France. For Isabella, a girl perhaps only 12 years old at the time, this was a sudden and dramatic shift from a planned marriage to a powerful local lord to being wedded to the King of England, a man known for his volatile temperament. The immediate consequence of this audacious act was predictable and severe. Hugh X of Lusignan, deeply enraged by John's theft of his intended bride, appealed to Philip II of France, John's feudal overlord, for his continental possessions. Philip, always eager to exploit John's weaknesses and expand his own domains, seized upon this breach of feudal law as a pretext. He summoned John to his court in Paris to answer for his conduct. John, fearing for his French territories, refused to appear, arguing that as King of England he was not subject to French jurisdiction. This defiance provided Philip with the perfect justification for war. In 1202, Philip II declared all of John's lands in France, including Normandy, Anjou, Maine, and Touraine, forfeit. This declaration ignited a major conflict that saw the French king systematically invade and conquer most of John's continental possessions. The Lusignan family, fueled by personal vengeance, actively supported Philip, ensuring that John faced relentless opposition in Poitou and other regions. The war was a disaster for John, culminating in the loss of Normandy in 1204, a territory that had been held by English kings for over a century. The loss of Normandy was a massive blow to John's prestige and resources, marking a significant turning point in Anglo-French relations and effectively shrinking the Plantagenet Empire. Isabella, now Queen of England, found herself caught in the midst of this political maelstrom. While she bore John several children, including the future Henry III, her marriage was overshadowed by the king's unpopularity and the constant political turmoil. John was deeply distrusted by his barons, and his aggressive, often arbitrary rule contributed to the growing discontent that would eventually lead to the Magna Carta. Isabella, though the mother of the heir, seemed to offer little comfort or stability to the embattled king. Her presence, a constant reminder of the Lusignan feud, likely only exacerbated John's struggles in France. After John's death in 1216, Isabella's life took another unexpected turn. She returned to her native Poitou, and in 1220, she made a surprising choice. She married her former betrothed, Hugh X of Lusignan. This second marriage to the man John had so brazenly scorned was a strategic move on her part, designed to restore her family's standing and assert her own influence in the region. However, this union too was fraught with difficulties. Isabella, accustomed to the status of a queen, struggled to accept a lesser role as a countess, and frequently intervened in politics, often clashing with her own son Henry III of England in his attempts to regain control of his continental inheritance. Isabella of Angouléme's first marriage, orchestrated by King John's impulsive desire and political recklessness, directly triggered a devastating war that led to the permanent loss of vast English territories in France. It created a deep and lasting animosity between the English and French crowns, contributing to generations of conflict. For Isabella herself, it meant being thrust into a tumultuous royal marriage that ended in widowhood, followed by a complicated second union with a man whose family had been deeply wronged by her first husband. Her life, though marked by beauty and royal status, was a continuous saga of being a pawn in larger political games, enduring the consequences of audacious actions and unresolved feuds. Number 6. Joanna I of Naples and Andrew of Hungary. The mid-14th century saw the Kingdom of Naples, a vibrant and strategically important realm in southern Italy, ruled by the House of Anjou. In 1343, the young Joanna I ascended to the throne, a mere 16 years old. Her grandfather, King Robert of Naples, had meticulously arranged her marriage to his nephew, Andrew of Hungary, the younger brother of King Louis I of Hungary. This union was intended to merge the Neapolitan and Hungarian branches of the Angevin dynasty, solidifying a powerful family alliance and ensuring a smooth succession to the Neapolitan throne. The arrangement was a grand dynastic play, aiming to create a formidable power bloc in Europe. Andrew, though a prince, was viewed by many Neapolitan nobles as uncouth and ambitious, a Hungarian outsider who sought to usurp power from Joanna. From the very beginning, the marriage was plagued by discord. Joanna, intelligent and strong-willed, found her young husband Andrew to be lacking in regal qualities and eager to assert his authority over her. The Neapolitan court, dominated by powerful local noble families, resented Andrew's Hungarian entourage and his insistence on being crowned King of Naples, not merely Prince Consort. Andrew's push for a full co-monarchy, a role beyond what the Neapolitan nobles believed was due to him, created deep friction within the royal household and among the factions at court. His Hungarian courtiers, arrogant and demanding, further alienated the native Neapolitan nobility. The tension escalated dramatically in 1345. On the night of 18 September, during a royal hunting trip at Aversa, a castle near Naples, a horrific event unfolded. Andrew of Hungary was brutally murdered. Chroniclers reported that he was lured from his bed by an urgent message, then ambushed in a dark corridor, strangled with a rope, and thrown from a window. His body was found by his horrified governess. The murder sent shockwaves across Europe and immediately cast a dark shadow over Joanna. Suspicion fell heavily upon her, fueled by the known discord in their marriage and the fact that she was the primary beneficiary of Andrew's removal. Some accounts directly implicated Joanna and her lover, Louis of Taranto, who would later become her second husband. Other theories pointed to powerful Neapolitan nobles who resented Andrew's influence and feared his ambitions. The murder of Andrew of Hungary plunged Naples into utter chaos and unleashed a devastating series of conflicts. Andrew's brother, King Louis I of Hungary, vowed vengeance for his sibling's death. He accused Joanna of complicity in the murder and launched two massive invasions of the Kingdom of Naples in 1347 and 1350, aiming to depose Joanna and punish her. These invasions, known as the Hungarian-Neapolitan Wars, were brutal and destructive. Hungarian forces swept through southern Italy, laying waste to the countryside, capturing cities, and executing many Neapolitan nobles suspected of involvement in the murder. Joanna was forced to flee Naples, seeking refuge first in Provence and then in Avignon, where she pleaded her case before Pope Clement VI. During her time in Avignon, Joanna skillfully defended herself against the accusations, convincing Pope Clement VI of her innocence, or at least of insufficient evidence to condemn her. She even sold Avignon to the Pope, to secure his protection and financial support. A highly controversial move. Despite the Pope's acquittal, Louis of Hungary remained unconvinced and continued his military campaigns. The wars devastated the Neapolitan economy, weakened the kingdom's defenses, and led to widespread famine and disease. The Angevin dynasty, once a powerful force, was fractured and weakened by the internal conflict. Joanna's reign continued to be marked by instability. She married 3 more times after Andrew's death, each marriage an attempt to secure alliances and produce an heir to stabilize her precarious throne. However, her numerous marriages and the enduring suspicions surrounding Andrew's murder fueled ongoing challenges to her legitimacy and authority. The unresolved mystery of Andrew's death became a dark stain on her reign, contributing to internal rebellions and external pressures. Eventually, in 1382, Joanna I was captured and executed by her own grandnephew, Charles of Durazzo, who had been adopted by her as her heir, but later turned against her. Charles, supported by the Hungarian crown, claimed the Neapolitan throne, citing Joanna's alleged role in Andrew's murder as justification for her deposition. The marriage of Joanna and Andrew, intended to unite 2 powerful Angevin lines and secure stability in Naples, instead became a catalyst for regicide, dynastic wars, and decades of political chaos, ending with the violent overthrow and death of the Queen herself. The tragedy of their union resonated through the Angevin dynasty, leading to a long and bloody struggle for control of southern Italy. Number 5. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Louis VII of France. In 1137, one of the most remarkable women of the Middle Ages, Eleanor of Aquitaine, inherited the vast and wealthy Duchy of Aquitaine, making her the most powerful heiress in Europe. Her marriage to Louis, the heir to the French throne, was quickly arranged. The union took place in Bordeaux in 1137, uniting the expansive territories of Aquitaine with the relatively smaller royal domain of France. The marriage was intended to be a lineal triumph for the French monarchy, consolidating immense landholdings and wealth under the Capetian crown, making France a truly formidable power. Louis became king just weeks after the wedding, following his father's sudden death, and Eleanor became Queen of France. From the outset, their personalities clashed profoundly. Louis VII was a pious, ascetic, and rather quiet man, deeply devoted to religious duties and ill-suited for the dynamic and often ruthless politics of the era. Eleanor, by contrast, was spirited, intelligent, strong-willed, and highly cultivated, accustomed to the vibrant courtly culture of Aquitaine. She found Louis's reserved nature and religious fervor stifling. He, in turn, was likely intimidated by her independent spirit and political acumen. The stark difference in their temperaments created an immediate and palpable friction at the French court. Their marital discord became a public spectacle during the Second Crusade, which Louis led from 1147 to 1149. Eleanor, defying expectations of a queen, insisted on accompanying her husband to the Holy Land, leading her own contingent of Aquitanian knights. Her active participation, unconventional attire, and alleged flirtations with her uncle, Raymond of Antioch, scandalized Louis and the more conservative members of the Crusade. Rumors of infidelity swirled around Eleanor, though concrete evidence was scarce. Crusade itself was a military failure, and the personal animosity between Louis and Eleanor intensified dramatically during their arduous journey and stay in the Levant. They often traveled separately, and their arguments were widely known. Upon their return to France, the marriage was beyond repair. They had 2 daughters, Marie and Alix, but no sons, a critical issue for a medieval monarch needing a male heir to secure the succession. Louis grew increasingly frustrated by the lack of a male child and by Eleanor's apparent disdain for him. Eleanor, for her part, longed for a way out of the marriage that she found personally unfulfilling and politically frustrating. She allegedly stated that she had married a monk, not a king. The lack of a male heir provided the convenient pretext for an annulment. After significant negotiations and papal intervention, the marriage was formally annulled in March 1152 by a council of French bishops at Beaugency. The official grounds for the annulment were consanguinity, that Louis and Eleanor were related within the prohibited degrees by canon law. While they were distantly related, such claims were often used as a legal loophole when a marriage no longer served its political purpose. The annulment meant that Eleanor regained her vast territories, a decision that would have monumental consequences for France. Within weeks of her annulment from Louis, Eleanor made a startling move. She married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, a dynamic and ambitious young man who was 10 years her junior. This second marriage, which took place in May 1152, was a political earthquake. Henry already controlled vast territories in western France, and his union with Eleanor added the immense duchy of Aquitaine to his domains. 2 years later, in 1154, Henry became King Henry II of England. This marriage created the vast Angevin Empire, stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees, effectively encircling the French royal domain and making the King of England far more powerful in France than the King of France himself. The annulment of Eleanor's marriage to Louis, meant to resolve personal conflict, inadvertently unleashed generations of gilly strife. It directly set the stage for the 100 Years' War, a prolonged and devastating conflict between England and France that lasted for over a century. The Angevin Empire, forged through Eleanor's second marriage, became a constant source of friction and warfare between the two crowns. Louis VII, for his part, later married 2 more times, finally securing a male heir with his third wife, Adela of Champagne. Eleanor's first marriage, conceived as a cornerstone of French royal power, instead resulted in personal misery, public scandal during the Crusade, the failure to produce a male heir, and ultimately an annulment that unleashed a new and far more powerful rival to the French throne. It was a union that, through its dissolution, radically reshaped the political map of medieval Europe and sowed the seeds for centuries of Anglo-French antagonism. Number 4. Edward II of England and Isabella of France. In the early 14th century, the English throne was occupied by Edward II, a king whose reign would be marked by weakness, political infighting, and ultimately a tragic end. His marriage, arranged in 1308, was to Isabella, the daughter of the powerful king Philip IV of France. This union was intended to cement a peace treaty between England and France, resolving long-standing territorial disputes over Gascony and creating a lasting alliance between 2 of Europe's most formidable monarchies. Isabella, known as the She-Wolf of France, was a beautiful and intelligent young woman, and she was brought to England with the hopes of bringing stability to the English court. From the very beginning, the marriage was deeply troubled by Edward II's personal preferences and political inclinations. Edward was widely believed to be attracted to men, and his favoritism towards a succession of male companions dominated his reign. His first and most notorious favorite was Piers Gaveston, a Gascon knight of humble origins. Edward lavished titles, wealth, and power upon Gaveston, elevating him above the most powerful English barons. This blatant favoritism deeply alienated the English nobility, who viewed Gaveston with contempt and saw him as an obstacle to proper governance and a corrupting influence on the king. Isabella found herself neglected and marginalized with her husband, spending his time and affection on Gaveston. The animosity towards Gaveston escalated, culminating in the baron's demand for his exile. Despite promises to Isabella, Edward repeatedly recalled Gaveston, further infuriating his powerful magnates. In 1312, after another recall, The exasperated barons captured and executed Gaveston without the king's consent. This act of defiance was a direct challenge to Edward's authority and deeply wounded the king, who mourned Gaveston profoundly. The execution of his favorite created an irreparable rift between Edward and his most powerful subjects. Following Gaveston's death, a new favorite rose to prominence: Hugh Despenser the Younger and his father Hugh Despenser the Elder. The Despensers were even more rapacious and ambitious than Gaveston, quickly monopolizing power and wealth, alienating not only the barons but also Queen Isabella. Queen, initially trying to work within the confines of her marriage, found herself increasingly isolated and deprived of her own traditional rights and lands. The Despensers' greed and the king's complete reliance on them left Isabella with little influence or resources. She was often humiliated, her requests ignored, and her own children, including the future Edward III, were often treated with contempt by the Despensers. By the mid-1320s, Isabella's patience had run out. Her marriage was a sham, her position untenable, and her life with Edward and the Despensers a constant source of degradation. In 1325, a critical opportunity arose. She was sent to France to negotiate a peace treaty with her brother, King Charles IV. While in France, she refused to return to England unless the Despensers were removed from power. This was an open act of defiance. In Paris, she encountered Roger Mortimer, an English baron who had previously rebelled against Edward II and had fled to France. Isabella and Mortimer became lovers and began to plot Edward's overthrow. In 1326, Isabella and Mortimer, along with a small invasion force, landed in England. They were met with widespread support from a nobility and populace utterly fed up with Edward II and the Despensers. The king's regime collapsed swiftly. Edward II, abandoned by his subjects, fled and was eventually captured. Hugh Despenser the Younger and his father were captured, subjected to gruesome public executions, and dismembered. Isabella and Mortimer had effectively seized control of the kingdom. Edward II was forced to abdicate in January 1327, making his 14-year-old son, Edward III, the new king. However, the true power rested with Isabella and Mortimer, who acted as regents. The former king was imprisoned first at Kenilworth, then Berkeley Castle. His fate was sealed. In September 1327, Edward II was almost certainly murdered at Berkeley Castle, likely on the orders of Isabella and Mortimer, though the precise details remain debated. The method of his death, rumored to be a red-hot poker inserted into his anus, was chosen to leave no external marks, a horrifying end to a king who had lost all authority. Isabella and Mortimer's regency, however, was short-lived. Edward III, growing into his own power, resented his mother's control and Mortimer's arrogance. In 1330, the young king staged a coup, arresting Mortimer and having him executed for treason. Isabella's direct political power was ended, though she was allowed to live in comfortable retirement, receiving a generous income. The marriage of Edward II and Isabella of France, intended to forge an Anglo-French alliance, instead devolved into a profound personal and political catastrophe. It resulted in the king's public humiliation, his deposition, and his probable murder, the rise and fall of powerful favorites, and ultimately the establishment of a regency that plunged England into further turmoil, a chilling demonstration of how royal unions could become fertile ground for personal resentment. Number 3. Blanche of Bourbon and Peter the Cruel of Castile. In the mid-14th century, the Iberian Peninsula was a complex chessboard of kingdoms, alliances, and bitter rivalries. The Kingdom of Castile was ruled by Peter I, a young monarch whose reign would be marked by violence and a reputation for cruelty, earning him the moniker Peter the Cruel. In 1353, at the age of 19, Peter was married by proxy to Blanche of Bourbon, a princess from the powerful French royal house of Valois. This marriage was a significant political alliance orchestrated by the French King John II to secure Castile's support against England in the ongoing 100 Years' War and to bring the Castilian kingdom into the French sphere of influence. Blanche arrived in Castile with a rich dowry and the promise of a powerful connection for Peter. However, the marriage was doomed from its very beginning by Peter's volatile temperament and his deep-seated infatuation with his mistress, Maria de Padilla. Peter had been involved with Maria for several years, and she had already borne him children. His devotion to her was absolute, and he made no attempt to conceal it, even as his bride Blanche arrived in Valladolid for their formal wedding ceremony. On the very day of the wedding, or shortly thereafter, Peter publicly abandoned Blanche. He refused to consummate the marriage, leaving his new queen in a state of profound humiliation and isolation. He then rode off to be with Maria de Padilla, leaving Blanche effectively a prisoner in the royal palace. Blanche's plight quickly became a scandal across Europe. The French king, her brother-in-law, was outraged by the insult to his royal house. The Castilian nobility, many of whom disliked Peter's autocratic rule and his favoritism towards Maria de Padilla, were horrified by his treatment of a foreign princess. The Pope, Innocent VI, intervened, demanding that Peter return to his lawful wife and fulfill his marital duties. Peter, however, ignored all pleas and threats, remaining steadfast in his rejection of Blanche. The abandonment of Blanche of Bourbon was not merely a personal affront. It became a major catalyst for civil war in Castile. Peter's actions alienated a significant portion of his nobility, who rallied around his half-brother, Henry of Trastamara. Henry, an illegitimate son of Peter's father, had long harbored ambitions for the throne and saw Peter's cruelty and disregard for his marriage as a perfect opportunity to gain support. Castilian civil war erupted in 1354, a brutal and protracted conflict that lasted for over a decade, plunging the kingdom into chaos and widespread devastation. Blanche of Bourbon remained a pawn in this bloody struggle. Peter, seeking to be rid of her entirely, imprisoned her in various castles, moving her frequently to prevent her from becoming a rallying point for his enemies. She was held at Arevalo, then Sigüenza, and later Toledo. Throughout her imprisonment, she remained a symbol of Peter's tyranny and a source of international condemnation for the Castilian king. Her existence served as a constant reminder of his breach of royal and religious vows. In 1361, Blanche of Bourbon was transferred to the castle of Medina Sidonia in the south of Castile. Soon after her arrival, she was poisoned, almost certainly on Peter's orders. Chroniclers of the time, such as Pedro López de Ayala, explicitly blamed Peter for her death, claiming he sent an executioner to administer the poison. Blanche was only 22 years old. Her murder was a final, chilling act in a marriage that had been a public spectacle of royal cruelty. Blanche's death, far from ending the conflict, further intensified the civil war, cemented Peter's reputation as the cruel, and galvanized his enemies. Henry of Trastamara, with French support, continued his fight against Peter. The war dragged on, marked by betrayals, shifting alliances, and extreme violence. Finally concluded in 1369, when Henry of Trastamara defeated and personally killed Peter the Cruel in a brutal encounter. Henry then ascended to the Castilian throne, establishing the Trastamara dynasty. The marriage of Blanche of Bourbon and Peter the Cruel, intended to secure a crucial European alliance, instead became a source of profound humiliation for the French royal family, triggered a devastating civil war in Castile, and ultimately led to the gruesome murder of the Queen herself. It shattered the peace of the kingdom for years, altered the course of Castilian history, and left a lasting stain on the reputation of a king whose personal cruelty transcended his public duties, all stemming from a royal union he refused to acknowledge. Number 2. Henry VI of England and Margaret of Anjou. In the mid-15th century, England was ruled by Henry VI, a king whose reign was plagued by mental instability and a fundamental lack of political aptitude. The Hundred Years' War against France was drawing to a close, and the English crown, exhausted and nearly bankrupt, sought a diplomatic end to the costly conflict. In 1445, a marriage was arranged between Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou, a niece of the French King Charles VII. This union was intended to cement a lasting peace between the two warring nations, bringing an end to generations of bloodshed and securing England's remaining territories in France through diplomacy rather than force. Margaret arrived in England with a strong personality and a fierce determination to protect her husband and the Lancastrian dynasty. However, the terms of the marriage treaty contained a secret clause. England would surrender the highly strategic territory of Maine to France. This concession was hugely unpopular among the English nobility and populace, who viewed it as a betrayal and a sign of weakness. When the clause became public, it fueled resentment against the king's ministers and, by extension, against the new queen, Margaret. She was immediately viewed with suspicion as an unwelcome Frenchwoman who had brought not peace and prosperity, but territorial loss and humiliation. The personal dynamic of the marriage was also deeply problematic. Henry VI was a gentle, pious, and scholarly man, prone to periods of mental illness that left him withdrawn and incapable of governance. He preferred quiet contemplation to the responsibilities of kingship. Margaret, by contrast, was a strong, intelligent, and ambitious woman, perfectly suited to the political arena. While Henry's weakness necessitated Margaret's strength, it also created a dangerous power vacuum. As Henry's periods of catatonia grew more frequent and severe, Margaret increasingly took control of the government, acting as regent. This assumption of power by a queen, particularly a French queen, was deeply resented by many English magnates, who saw it as an usurpation of their traditional roles, and a sign of the king's complete incapacity. The court became factionalized. The Duke of York, Richard Plantagenet, a powerful magnate with a strong claim to the throne, emerged as the leader of the opposition to Margaret and her allies. He argued for his right to be protector of the realm during Henry's incapacitation, challenging Margaret's authority. This growing rivalry, exacerbated by the military failures in France and the loss of almost all English possessions there, escalated into open conflict. The marriage, intended to bring peace abroad, instead ignited civil war at home. In 1455, the simmering tensions erupted into what became known as the Wars of the Roses. The First Battle of St. Albans marked the beginning of a brutal dynastic struggle between the houses of Lancaster, represented by Henry VI and Margaret, and York, represented by Richard, Duke of York, and later his son Edward IV. Margaret of Anjou became the de facto leader of the Lancastrian cause, a formidable military and political figure who personally led armies, raised funds, and made strategic decisions. She was a relentless fighter for her husband's throne and their son's inheritance. However, her aggressive and often ruthless actions, coupled with her French origins, further alienated a portion of the English populace and nobility. The wars raged for decades, marked by immense bloodshed, shifting loyalties, and frequent changes of monarch. Henry VI was deposed multiple times, imprisoned, and restored to the throne only to be deposed again. Margaret, driven by a fierce maternal instinct to protect her son Edward, Prince of Wales, fought valiantly. However, the Lancastrian cause suffered a devastating blow at the Battle of Tewkesbury in 1471, where her son was killed. Soon after, Henry VI, imprisoned in the Tower of London, died, almost certainly murdered on the orders of the triumphant Yorkist King Edward IV. Margaret of Anjou, after years of tireless campaigning and witnessing the loss of her husband and son, was captured and spent several years in captivity. She was eventually ransomed by the French king, Louis XI, in 1475 and returned to France, living out her remaining years in relative obscurity and poverty. She died in 1482. The marriage of Henry VI and Margaret of Anjou, meant to secure peace with France, instead became a direct catalyst for one of England's most devastating civil wars. It exacerbated deep-seated political rivalries, exposed the profound weakness of the monarchy, and led to decades of bloodshed and instability that reshaped the English landscape. For Margaret, it meant a life of relentless struggle, personal tragedy, and the ultimate loss of everything she fought for, a queen whose desperate efforts to protect her family inadvertently fueled the very conflicts that consumed them. Number 1. Joanna of Castile and Philip the Handsome. The late 15th and early 16th centuries saw the emergence of a new global power, Spain. The marriage of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile had united the Iberian kingdoms, and their children were sought as dynastic connections across Europe. Their third child, Joanna, born in 1479, was a key pawn in their ambitious matrimonial strategies. In 1496, Joanna was betrothed to Philip the Handsome, the son of the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian I, and Mary of Burgundy. This marriage was a monumental strategic alliance, known as the Habsburg-Burgundian marriage. It aimed to create a formidable anti-French bloc, encircling France with a network of powerful Habsburg and Spanish territories. Philip was a monarchic and handsome prince, heir to vast Burgundian and Habsburg lands. However, the union was marked by profound personal tragedy and political instability from its very beginning. Joanna and Philip were immediately attracted to each other, a rare occurrence in arranged marriages. They fell passionately in love, but their personalities were profoundly incompatible. Joanna was intelligent, intensely emotional, and possessive, driven by a powerful love for her husband. Philip, equally passionate, was also known for his philandering and his carefree attitude towards his marital vows. He frequently engaged in extramarital affairs, deeply hurting and infuriating Joanna. Her intense jealousy and his constant betrayals created a storm of emotional conflict within their household. The death of Joanna's elder siblings, John and Isabella, and her nephew Miguel, in quick succession between 1497 and 1500, suddenly made Joanna heir to the crowns of Castile and Aragon. This unexpected shift transformed her from a strategically important princess to the most powerful heiress in Europe. Her emotional vulnerability and instability, exacerbated by Philip's infidelities, became a matter of grave concern for the future of the Spanish kingdoms and the broader European balance of power. Her parents, Ferdinand and Isabella, became increasingly worried about her mental state, which was already showing signs of distress. Philip, now the consort of the future Queen of Spain, became increasingly ambitious and impatient to seize power in Castile. He openly disdained the traditional Castilian nobility and clashed constantly with his father-in-law, Ferdinand, who was acting as regent for Castile after Isabella's death in 1504. Philip's arrogance and his blatant disregard for Castilian laws and customs created widespread resentment among the Castilian nobles. Joanna's emotional state deteriorated further under the strain of her husband's ambitions and the growing rift between him and her father. In 1506, during a journey to Castile, Philip the Handsome died suddenly, possibly from typhoid fever, though rumors of poisoning circulated. His death, at the age of 28, plunged Joanna into an even deeper state of despair. She refused to allow his body to be buried immediately, traveling with his coffin for months across Castile, occasionally opening it to gaze upon his decaying corpse. This macabre procession, witnessed by many, solidified the belief among her contemporaries that she was Joanna the Mad. Her behavior was interpreted as clear evidence of her mental incapacitation, rendering her unfit to rule. Her grief and her unusual conduct provided the perfect pretext for Ferdinand of Aragon to assume the regency of Castile, effectively sidelining his daughter. After a brief period of nominal rule, Joanna was confined by her father Ferdinand in the royal convent of Santa Clara in Tordesillas in 1509. She remained there for the rest of her life, a period spanning 46 years, effectively stripped of her power and title, though she was still legally the Queen of Castile. She was isolated, her children, including the future Emperor Charles V, raised away from her. When Ferdinand died in 1516, Joanna's son, Charles, inherited the vast Spanish dominions. Charles, who would become one of Europe's most powerful rulers, continued his mother's confinement at Tordesillas. Despite her mental state, Joanna remained a potential rallying point for rebellions against Charles, particularly during the revolt of the Comuneros in the early 1520s, when rebels sought to restore her to power. Charles, however, deftly managed the situation, and Joanna remained imprisoned until her death in 1555. The marriage of Joanna of Castile and Philip the Handsome, intended to solidify a grand dynastic alliance and secure the future of two powerful European houses, instead spiraled into a profound personal tragedy marked by jealousy, infidelity, and eventual mental breakdown. It resulted in the premature death of the ambitious husband, the lifelong imprisonment of the queen, and a protracted period of political uncertainty and regencies in Castile. The union, meant to be a cornerstone of Habsburg power, became a symbol of the devastating human cost of dynastic ambition and the tragic vulnerability of individuals caught in the impersonal machinations of royal power.